So that's all there is, more or less, from that entire tour. There's another short clip at the end of the documentary. It may be that Michael Benson has much more, but it's not available. There's no access to the Slovene TV archives. So that's one of the many reasons why Kapital is so tantalising and intriguing, because for those of us who were there, it was really, I mean, certainly one of the 2 or 3 most impressive Laibach shows. Kapital is one of the most complex and perhaps as a result one of the most underrated and puzzling albums by Laibach. It emerged from a creative and conceptual dead end, an aborted collaboration with the French producer Bertrand Bourgalat, during which the group experimented with a more romantic pop direction. And the only tangible result of this is the romantic female vocal track, Steel Trust, which is present only on the vinyl and cassette versions, and on the cassette version it's in a dance remix, early hardcore style, quite interesting. So after the failure of this experiment, Laibach fell back on its own resources, setting itself the task of producing a new album for a new decade, using new techniques and equipment, including now long forgotten sequencing software. Some of Kapital's uncanny not quite rightness stems from these technical factors, and the group's response to a new way of working. It now seems like an artefact from the golden age of sampling, before record and film companies had awoken to how much they could charge for the use of a few seconds of copyright material. To produce such a sample-heavy album now would probably not be possible, either economically or... So the first we heard of the new material was the single Wirtschaft ist tot, which emerged almost without warning, followed just a week later by the monumental album. Neither made explicit reference to political events since 1989. Instead, its violent stylistic collisions, experimentalism, and political-economic pessimism provided both a literal and an esoteric commentary on the rapid lurch towards capitalist globalization, accelerated by the implosion of the state's socialist system. So, many Kapital tracks were less forceful than before, and Laibach seemed to have restrained or abstracted itself, and to have chosen a far less linear style. Kapital was simultaneously monolithic and fluid, mutating between the versions on the cassette, CD and vinyl, and in performance it would mutate again. Kapital surprised many by the relative lack of explicit political references to the recent changes. The use of socialist symbolism in Irwin's 1991 Kapital project seemed to comment far more directly on the political changes, and you can see that installation at Calvert at the moment. The themes of the album are varied and oblique, including economics, astrophysics, sampling and hip-hop. At the time, many found it infuriating, obscure and mystifying, and it was less successful than previous releases. However, it demonstrates the delayed action effect of many NSK works, the true significance of which unfolds slowly in relation to subsequent events. The alternate mixes of the tracks on the different formats heightened the sense of a multi-layered, non-linear text in which the playful and mystifying aspects of Laibach vied to overcome the militant and the absolute. The sounds were still monumental, but structured by far greater sonic complexity and ambiguity, and there seemed to be a need to conceal and qualify impressions and moods that had previously predominated. Kapital's instrumental tracks suggest a kind of informational overload, with contemporary elements battling against fragments of far older musical forms. The arrangements recapitulate the decentered chaos of postmodern culture, and attempt to transcend it by rematerialising fixed forms from the stylistic chaos of late capitalism, to which Laibach itself contributes. In contrast to the linear styles of the period, even Kapital's technoid elements are made strange by odd rhythms and incongruous songs. Each track transgresses the norms of contemporary music and listeners' expectations. This designed unpredictability evokes Adorno and Horkheimer's critique of the predictability of popular music. It emphasises complexity and unpredictability, even in relation to its own stylistic. Listeners' belief that there must be some inherent meaning in the lyrics, and that at least some purpose will become apparent, is manipulated and inflamed. Yet Kapital's logic is uneven and fragmented, and the inconsistent mixture of the sounds represents the first time that Laibach's music becomes totally structured by the paradoxes and contradictions that structure its discourse, which themselves form a type of private. Laibach transgress their own sonic archetypes as well as continuing their deconstruction of Western musical norms, and anticipated the chaotic genre fusions and schisms affecting electronic music. Captive snatches of hip-hop, jazz, rock and disco are assimilated into an esoteric, contemporary, neo-archaic form which encodes the boundaryless consumer-driven chaos of post-Cold War globalization. So if the recorded versions of Kapital were structurally unstable and plural, in the live context, Laibach took the process much further, decoding, recoding and enhancing the originals, and establishing a paradoxical norm of strict flux and ordered. At this point, the provocatively titled and lyrically obscure White Law set off the Pavlovian response from 2 or 3 fascists at the front who took it upon themselves to give Nazi salutes. Their response to the title of the track and their performance of their desire to subject themselves to the hegemonic fascistic force they fantasized about functioned, as at many other concerts, to make Laibach's point for it. As the show continued, a heated but just about peaceful ideological debate about the eternal question, are Laibach fascist or not, unfolded between a handful of fascists and a larger group of friends. That's a really good example. I mean, they just hear the phrase "White Law." It's the cue I've been waiting for. It's perfect. I've never seen a debate like that at any of the other gigs I've been to. You get them afterwards sometimes, but literally right at the front, 2 groups, sort of the 2 of you, and then turning away from the stage, and this debate going on regardless of the show, and sort of really turning in. It's a really interesting. That's a really good example of social sculpture, which Laibach took from Boyce, and the way that you get these unexpected reactions in the audience, and you get the physical space being changed. So the shifting dynamics of Kapital seem to impel Laibach to constant mutation, remixing and deconstructing itself even more intensively live than on the album. The live version of the cassette version of Le Privilège d'amour is one of the most radical transformations, featuring a whole sequence of extra lines with a second vocalist intoning lines such as "hope for hope" or "war for war." Additionally, electronic effects were applied to the lead vocal, one of the very few times that Laibach had done. So later on, the sequence of Entardstewelt and the Hunter's Funeral Procession achieved a euphoric momentum. At these moments, there was a mythic sense of the full aesthetic power of the integrated Gesamtkunstwerk coming together. The videos, the lights, the arrangements seeming to conform to the classic paradigm of Laibachness before veering off again into further experimentation. So in other words, the show only comes together in the classic way for a song or 2 at a time, and then it goes back into experimentation and unpredictability. I think that's why some people were disappointed, because they imagined, okay, end of the Cold War, let's have Opus Day 2, let's have a really clear monumental statement that we can all shake our fists to, let's have something. And instead they get 3 different formats of the same album. They get sleeve notes filled with these really obscure, confusing elements, but I mean, it was good for someone like me because it actually drew me in further and made me really want to try and crack it, to crack the code. A lot of the stuff on Kapital, it's the most subtle and implicit of Laibach albums. Most of the other Laibach albums are very explicit, except maybe the Bach, which is very subtle and, again, quite obscure. But it's much more subtle and even personal in a strange way, collectively personal, because it's to do with the members' obsessions and some of the sources that they found really richest, and they're not so concerned with trying to communicate it directly. The Laibach rarities here, a lot of NSK objects as well, and if you want to join us for a drink afterwards, then feel free, and thanks for coming out on a Monday night. Cheers.
Thank you.